I have a story to share with you all. I feel that someone other than me has to know. Let me get the important information out of the way so I can get to what I actually want to tell you guys about. Hello, my name is Raphael. I grew up in Oklahoma City. I was a troubled kid. I don't want to go into the specifics, but my parents put some bad habits into me when I was young, and I was a troublemaker. I always disrupted class when the teacher was talking, always screaming and swearing, and of course, I got punished for it, usually with a detention. But the one I want to focus on is from my senior year, when Miss Jones made me stay with her in detention for constantly shouting racist and sexist slurs when she was trying to teach history. She was so angry at me, she told me I ought to be deported for what I act like. Heck yeah, I got in detention for that. An hour-long one, too. But I showed up for it. Only so much trouble I can get in before it actually hurts me. Nothing really interesting happened throughout the detention. Miss Jones never spoke to me after she sat me down. I sat there, pretending to read a book while my phone was hidden behind it. But after a solid 60 minutes, that's when things started. I noticed that the light from outside was just gone. I turned my head upright to see that it was pitch black outside. No sky, no stars, absolutely nothing but blackness. Then I went over to look at Miss Jones, but she was gone. Her seat was empty. I started panting for breath as my eyes darted back and forth to see if I could find a trace of her, but there was nothing. I was alone, and it was pitch black outside. Personally, I just wanted to get out of there and go back home. So I set out to do just that. I had my car parked outside and I planned to drive home and away from this madness. That is, until I stepped outside of the classroom door. In the hallway, all of the lockers went from their usual blue color to being gray. In fact, the whole rest of the school was seemingly in grayscale. I went over to touch the locker and it was so cold, which was unusual for a building that was so hot around this time of year. I heard the bell ring after this, and I jumped up high into the air, yelping like a little kid when a spider just jumped on them. The bells were not supposed to go off at this hour. School was out. The bells had no purpose anymore. Even the security guards were leaving soon enough. But I heard footsteps coming from all doors besides the one I just came from. That was when they all came. Students of all ages, all in grayscale. No matter their physique, they were all gray, with a few that had black hair. When they started to walk my way, they all stopped, gasped, and stared at me with wide eyes. All of them, right at me. I wanted to say something, but I could not think of anything to say. They were not supposed to be here, but they were. After a few moments, their surprised and mildly scared expressions turned to scowls and frowns. They then started charging for me. This sent shivers down my spine as I jumped up and ran in the other direction, down the corridor, down the stairs, trying to reach the front door. I did manage to outrun them, but when I went through the front door, I found something unexpected. I started to sprint towards where my car was supposed to be, but I tripped on a broom and fell down. Looking around, I noticed that I was not outside like I was supposed to be. I was in a large janitorial closet. I sat there on the floor for a few minutes, trying to ponder what might be happening. Had I been transported into an alternate dimension? Was this just hell for my horrible behavior? But after I spent a few minutes collecting my thoughts, I told myself that no matter what was happening, there would be a way out. There always was. And so I got out of the closet and looked around to see that it led into a hallway. It was empty, so that meant I could at least move around. I turned the corner to see if I could try the back entrance instead, but right when I did, an older woman, who I assumed is a teacher, was waiting to place her hand over my mouth and hold me by the wrist. I tried to pry her hands off, but they were as firm as steel. After a few moments, she spoke to me in the most monotone voice possible. "Young man, you must learn from your mistakes. How many times must you be told to be good before some punishment is due?" With that, she dragged me to the principal's office, her hands still on my wrist and mouth, preventing me from speaking. She was still as strong as a steel robot, it seemed. When we arrived, she threw me into the office, which instead led to a large classroom with bold words written on the whiteboard. "Bad young man. For your punishment, you must write an essay on what you've done." I told myself that this was not directed specifically at me and just tried for the door. But when I opened it, the teacher was waiting for me. She instantly lifted her leg up high and kicked me in the chest so hard I got pushed backwards as I fell down onto the hard floor. She slammed the door shut as I was left there, groaning and moaning in pain. It was a few minutes before I could get back up again, and when I did, I noticed a gray substance seeping from the corners of the ceiling. Since it was gray, I could not really identify what it was, but I can tell you that it smelled absolutely terrible, and I did not want to be around it. So I looked around the room, and I saw that there was a large stack of papers and pens on each desk. On top was a black sheet of paper with white text. I turned it over, and it read a set of instructions. "Raphael, you have been put in detention for racism, sexism, and interrupting class. For that, you must write an explanation of what you have done wrong, and if you do not, then this slow-acting acid will have at you. So please, Raphael, get to writing." I suddenly realized why I was being locked in here with such great force. Someone wanted to kill me for my behavior, and as much as I hated having to apologize, being dissolved by acid slowly and painfully was not something I wanted. I took a seat and wrote a 3,000-page essay explaining all of my misdeeds. That shouting racist slurs is bad by virtue of discriminating against people. It could also trigger people who have PTSD associated with said slurs. I continued it by saying that sexism encourages men to pick on women and women to accept that, and that women are just as human as I am and I should not ever encourage that sort of behavior. Finally, I finished it by explaining that my teacher has a job to do, and if she fails to do it, she gets in trouble. Also, some of the other students actually want to learn, and I should not distract them from this. That essay was much more in-depth than I made it sound, but I don't have it on hand because once I wrote the last word down on it, it glowed briefly in a bright flash of light, at which point it disappeared. By this point, the acid was reaching all around the room, seeping into my shoes and causing burns. But once the paper vanished, the teacher opened the door, the acid disappeared, and she beckoned me with her hand to come out. I came racing up, but before I could go far, she grabbed me by the wrist. I swear she almost dislocated something. "Now, young man, what have we learned in here?" I was quaking and trembling at her words. "That I should not be racist or disruptful." She nodded her head for me before placing 2 fingers on my forehead. After that, everything went black. When I came to, I was resting back in the detention room with Miss Jones. She was just looking at me, waiting for me to come to like this. "Raphael, what have we learned in this detention?" My eyes widened slightly at those words, but I did not stutter. "That I should not be racist or disrupt class." She nodded her head for me. "Good boy. Now, detention is over and you may go home. Just please do not do this ever again." I wasted no time racing out of there, into my car and riding all the way home. And every step I took hurt because the acid from earlier had still burned my feet. It also made driving my car really painful. After that, I stopped with my whole bad boy routine and actually paid attention in school. I never again made racist or sexist jokes in school, and I never disrupted class. I was a good student. Since graduation, I actually got a fairly high-paying job as a bank teller, and people seem to like working with me, but I can never shake it. What was that place? What did she do to me? Who else is in there? I couldn't hold it in any longer, so I am sharing my story because I hope someone else can maybe shed some light on what happened that day.